solitary farmer's quiet morning routine shatters when he finds a bloodied stranger seeking refuge in his barn, leading to an impulsive dawn wedding that transforms two outcasts into unlikely allies. Will their fragile bond of protection bloom into something deeper, or will the violent men pursuing her destroy any chance at the grace they've both been denied? The scream that split the Nebraska dawn wasn't human. Ezekiel Morrison bolted upright in his narrow bed, heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. Outside his cabin window, darkness still ruled the November morning of 1867. But something had gone terribly wrong in his barn. The sound came again. High, panicked, full of pain. One of his horses. He grabbed his boots, not bothering to lace them properly, and snatched the rifle from beside his door. The frozen ground bit through his thin socks as he ran across the yard, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. At 34, Ezekiel had learned to expect trouble on the frontier, but this felt different. Wrong. The barn door hung open, swaying in the wind like a broken wing. "Easy, girl," he called softly, raising his lantern high. The golden light swept across familiar stalls, revealing his two maras pressed against the far wall, their eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't fear of him that had them spooked. Something else shared their space. In the corner where he kept the winter hay, a pile of blankets moved. Ezekiel's finger found his rifle's trigger, but he didn't raise the weapon. The movement was too small, too careful to be a threat. As he stepped closer, the blankets fell away, and he saw her. A young woman with tangled blonde hair and clothes that told a story he didn't want to read. Blood had dried on her split lip. Dark bruises painted her jaw like storm clouds. "Don't," she whispered, scrambling backward into the hay. "Please don't hurt me anymore." The words hit Ezekiel harder than any fist ever had. In all his years of loneliness, he'd never heard such complete defeat in another person's voice. It sounded like his own heart talking. "I won't hurt you," he said, setting his rifle against the wall. "You're safe here." She laughed, but the sound held no joy. "Safe? Mister, I don't think I remember what that word means." Ezekiel crouched down, keeping his distance. Up close, he could see she was maybe 19, with blue eyes that had seen too much. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and when she moved, she favored her left side like something inside hurt bad. "What's your name?" he asked. "Does it matter? I'll be gone by morning anyway." "It matters to me." She studied his face in the lantern light, looking for lies or tricks or worse things. Finding none, she said, "Mercy. My name is Mercy." The irony of it made Ezekiel's chest tight. Here was a girl named Mercy who looked like she'd never received any. "I'm Ezekiel. This is my farm." "I'm sorry I broke into your barn, Mr. Ezekiel. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and it was so cold. And, just Ezekiel," he interrupted gently. "And you didn't break in. The door don't lock anyway." A ghost of a smile crossed her face before pain chased it away. She pressed a hand to her ribs, wincing. "You need help," Ezekiel said. "Let me." "No." The word came out sharp as broken glass. "I mean, thank you, but I can't ask for help. People who help me get hurt." "Who hurt you?" Mercy's eyes went distant, like she was seeing something far away and terrible. "Men who think they own whatever they want. Men who don't like being told no." Ezekiel felt anger rise in his throat, hot and bitter. He'd known men like that, men who took what they wanted and called it their right. Men who'd made his own childhood a nightmare before he'd grown big enough to fight back. "Where are they now?" he asked. "Looking for me, probably. They always look." She struggled to sit up straighter, and Ezekiel saw her strength was nearly gone. "I'll leave before they find me here. I won't bring trouble to your door." "What if I said you could stay?" The question surprised them both. Ezekiel hadn't planned to say it, but now that the words were out, he found he meant them. This broken girl reminded him of himself, of the boy who'd once hidden in barns and prayed someone would see him as worth saving. "You don't know me," Mercy said. "I know enough. What if I'm a thief? What if I'm running from the law?" Ezekiel looked at her torn dress, her bruised face, the way she held herself like something inside was broken. Are you? No. But you don't know that. Then tell me what you are running from. Mercy closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were full of tears she wouldn't let fall. Men who think they bought me when they bought my train passage. Men who think a girl traveling alone is fair game for whatever they want to do. The story came out in pieces, like water through a cracked dam. She'd been traveling west with a wagon train, hoping to reach California and start fresh. The wagon master's son had decided she owed him payment for the journey, payment she wasn't willing to give. When she'd fought him off, he'd beaten her and left her behind. They said they'd come back for me, she finished. Said nobody leaves them looking like fools. Ezekiel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Men like that didn't forgive. They didn't forget. And they definitely didn't let anyone get away with fighting back. How long ago? He asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. Time gets fuzzy when you're just trying to stay alive. 3 days wasn't long enough. If they were still looking, they'd find tracks leading to his farm. They'd come asking questions, and men like that didn't accept polite answers. Can you walk? He asked. Fear flashed across Mercy's face. Are you throwing me out? No. I'm taking you inside where it's warm and safe, where I can tend to your injuries proper. Why would you do that for a stranger? Ezekiel stood and held out his hand. Because once I was a stranger too, and someone helped me when they didn't have to. It wasn't entirely true. No one had helped him as a boy, but it was the kind of help he dreamed of receiving. Maybe that was close enough. Mercy stared at his outstretched hand like it was a snake that might bite. Trust didn't come easy to someone who'd been hurt. But finally, slowly, she reached out and let him help her to her feet. She was lighter than he'd expected and weaker. Her legs shook as they walked toward the cabin, and twice she had to stop and lean against him. Each time, she whispered apologies that broke his heart a little more. Don't apologize for being hurt, he said. It wasn't your fault. How do you know? Because I know what fault looks like. And I know what innocence looks like too. Inside the cabin, Ezekiel lit the fire and put coffee on to boil. The warmth seemed to hit Mercy all at once, and she swayed on her feet. Sit, he said, guiding her to his one good chair. I'll get some supplies to clean those cuts. As he gathered bandages and salve, Ezekiel found himself studying the stranger who'd appeared in his barn like an answer to a prayer he'd never dared speak. She sat perfectly still, watching the fire with eyes that seemed older than her years. Mercy, he said, testing how her name felt in his mouth. Yes, you're safe here. I give you my word. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that neither of them fully understood. Recognition, maybe. Two people who'd been broken by the world, finding each other in the darkness. Thank you, she said simply. But as Ezekiel knelt to tend her wounds, both of them knew that safety was a fragile thing on the frontier. And somewhere out there, dangerous men were still looking for the girl who dared to fight back. Blood told stories, and Mercy's told one of survival. As dawn light crept through the cabin windows, Ezekiel worked quietly to clean the cuts on Mercy's face and hands. Each injury spoke of violence. Knuckles scraped from fighting back, bruises that mapped out someone's cruelty. But beneath the damage, he saw strength that surprised him. Hold still, he murmured, dabbing at a cut near her temple. This might sting. I've had worse, she said, but her voice was tight with pain. That don't make it hurt less. The gentleness in his touch was foreign to Mercy. Men's hands had always brought pain or demands she didn't want to meet. These hands asked for nothing, gave comfort instead of taking it. The strangeness of it made her eyes water more than the medicine. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. Ezekiel paused in his work. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows like something trying to get in. Maybe because kindness is free, and I got more of it than I know what to do with. Most people don't see it that way. Most people aren't sitting in my kitchen. Despite everything, Mercy almost smiled. Almost. You talk like someone who's been alone too long. 7 years, Ezekiel admitted. Since my folks died of fever. Turns out talking to horses and cattle don't make for much conversation. 7 years by yourself out here? How do you stand it? The question hit deeper than she'd intended. How did he stand it? The endless quiet, the long winters, the way silence could become so heavy it felt like drowning? Some days I don't, he said honestly. Some days I think about walking into town and never coming back. Finding someplace where there's people and noise and life. But you stay. This land needs tending. The animals need feeding. And leaving. He struggled to find words for something he'd never said out loud. Leaving feels like admitting I'm not worth the space I take up. Mercy went very still. She knew that feeling, the weight of believing you were nothing more than trouble wrapped in skin. You're worth more than space, she said quietly. So are you. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Two people who'd been convinced of their own worthlessness, suddenly seeing worth in each other. Tell me about the men chasing you, Ezekiel said, returning to his careful work on her injuries. Mercy's jaw tightened. What's to tell? They're mean, they're angry, and they don't give up easy. How many? 5, maybe 6. The wagon master, his son James, and some of the other men who thought I should be grateful for their attention. James is the one who hurt you? James is the one who started it. The others just watched. Her voice turned bitter as old coffee. Watching's the same as doing, far as I'm concerned. Ezekiel finished cleaning the last cut and sat back on his heels. They say where they were headed? West like everyone else. But they were talking about wintering somewhere around here, waiting for the passes to clear come spring. A chill ran down Ezekiel's spine that had nothing to do with the November cold. If they were staying local, they'd have time to search. Time to ask questions. Time to find one lone farmer who might be hiding something. We need to think about this smart, he said. We? Mercy looked at him with surprise. This isn't your fight, Ezekiel. I won't drag you into trouble that's not yours to begin with. Soon as I helped you, it became my trouble too. You can still change your mind. Tell them you never saw me. I'll understand. Ezekiel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty prairie that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, violent men were searching for the woman sitting in his kitchen. The smart thing would be to send her on her way, to protect himself and his quiet life. But when he turned back to look at Mercy, he saw something that made the choice easy. She was trying to look brave, but her hands shook as she sipped the coffee he'd given her. She was alone and hurt and scared, and she expected him to abandon her because that's what people did. I'm not changing my mind, he said. Why not? Because 7 years ago, I was half dead from fever and hunger, and a traveling preacher found me collapsed by the side of the road. He could have kept riding, probably should have, considering how sick I looked. But he didn't. He stayed and nursed me back to health, never asking for nothing in return. What happened to him? Died of the same fever 3 weeks later. Caught it from taking care of me. Ezekiel's voice grew quiet. I've been trying to figure out how to pay that debt ever since. Mercy set down her coffee cup with hands that had stopped shaking. You don't owe me nothing, Ezekiel. Maybe not, but I owe him, and helping you feels like the right way to honor what he did. Before Mercy could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast across the frozen ground. Ezekiel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the gray morning light, he could see them. 5 riders cresting the hill that led to his farm. Even from a distance, their intent was clear in the way they sat their horses, in the weapons they carried openly. They found me, Mercy whispered, and all the color drained from her face. Get to the back room, Ezekiel said. His voice calm despite the fear clawing at his chest. Stay quiet. No matter what you hear. Ezekiel, go. Now. Mercy stood on shaking legs, but she didn't move toward the back room. Instead, she looked at this man who'd shown her more kindness in one morning than she'd known in months. If they ask about me, she said, tell them I was never here. Tell them whatever you have to tell them. Mercy, promise me. I won't have your death on my conscience too. The riders were closer now. close enough that Ezekiel could make out faces beneath their hat brims. Hard faces that spoke of men who enjoyed their work when that work involved hurting people. "I promise," he lied, and watched relief flood Mercy's features as she disappeared into the back room. But as Ezekiel checked his rifle and prepared to face 5 armed men alone, he knew he just made a promise he had no intention of keeping. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed hopeless. Outside, the riders had reached his yard. One of them called out, and his voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "Morning, farmer. We're looking for something that belongs to us. You boys are on private land." Ezekiel stepped onto his porch, rifle held loose in his hands but ready. The 5 riders sat their horses in a half-circle around his yard, close enough that he could smell the sweat and leather and something else, the sour scent of men who enjoyed causing pain. The leader was younger than Ezekiel had expected, maybe 25, with the kind of face that had never known real hardship. His clothes were too fine for trail riding, his boots too clean for honest work. This had to be James, the wagon master's son who thought the world owed him whatever he wanted. "Private land, you say?" James smiled, but it was the smile of a snake before it strikes. "Well, we won't be long. Just looking for a girl who ran off with something valuable." "What kind of valuable?" Ezekiel asked, though his gut already knew the answer would make him sick. "The kind that doesn't concern you, farmer." One of the other men spoke up, older, harder, with scars that told stories of violence. "Just tell us if you've seen a blonde girl, maybe 19, traveling alone." From inside the cabin, Mercy pressed herself against the backroom wall, her heart beating so loud she was sure they could hear it outside. Through a crack in the shutters, she could see part of the yard, could make out the shapes of the men who'd hurt her. James sat his horse like a king on a throne, sure of his power over everyone around him. "Can't say I have," Ezekiel said, and the lie came easier than he'd expected. "Been pretty quiet out here." James nudged his horse closer to the porch. "Mind if we look around? Girl like that might have found somewhere to hide without you knowing." "I'd mind that quite a bit, actually." The temperature in the yard seemed to drop 10 degrees. The 5 men exchanged looks, and Ezekiel saw hands drift toward gun handles. He'd been in fights before, too many fights, but never against odds like this. "Now that's not very neighborly," James said, his voice still pleasant but with an edge like broken glass underneath. "We're just trying to recover stolen property." "What exactly did she steal?" "Money, food, a horse." James rattled off the lies like he'd practiced them. "Plus she owes for passage on our wagon train. Can't have people thinking they can just run off without paying their debts." Ezekiel knew lies when he heard them. He'd told enough of his own over the years, mostly to hide bruises or explain why he couldn't sit still in school. These men weren't looking for a thief. They were looking for a victim who'd gotten away. "Even if I had seen this girl," Ezekiel said carefully, "what makes you think I'd hand her over to 5 armed men who won't even tell me their names?" That hit home. James's pleasant mask slipped for just a second, showing the anger underneath. "Names don't matter. What matters is you're harboring a criminal." "Funny thing about criminals," Ezekiel said. "In my experience, they usually travel in packs." The insult landed like a slap. 2 of the men started to dismount, but James held up a hand to stop them. He was smarter than Ezekiel had hoped, smart enough to know that violence would bring questions they couldn't answer. "You got a big mouth for a man standing alone," the scarred man said. "I'm not alone." Ezekiel shifted his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at anyone but making sure they all saw it. "Got plenty of friends around here. Winchester, Colt, Smith and Wesson. Real sociable bunch." In the back room, Mercy bit her lip to keep from crying out. This man was risking his life for her, and she couldn't do anything but hide and listen. It went against every instinct she had. Running had kept her alive, but running had also made her feel like a coward. James studied Ezekiel's face, looking for cracks in his story. "You know what I think, farmer? I think you're lying. I think you know exactly where our girl is. Think whatever you want. Doesn't change the fact that you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" James laughed, and the sound was ugly. "Friend, Do you know who my father is? Do you know what kind of connections we have in this territory? Don't much care about your daddy or his friends. Out here, a man's connections don't mean much when he's got a bullet in his chest. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Ezekiel knew he was pushing too hard, but he also knew men like these. Give them an inch and they'd take everything you had. Brave talk from a dirt farmer, the scarred man said. But there's 5 of us and 1 of you. 5 of you, 1 of me, and about 20 rounds in this rifle. You boys good at math. James's horse danced sideways, picking up on its rider's tension. The young man's face had gone red with anger, but he was still thinking, still calculating odds. That made him dangerous in a different way. This conversation's over, James said finally. But we'll be back. And next time we might not be so polite. Next time you might not be welcome at all. The men turned their horses, but James looked back over his shoulder. That girl you're hiding, she's poison, farmer. Everything she touches turns bad. You'll figure that out soon enough. They rode away at a trot, kicking up dust and leaving behind the smell of threats and violence. But Ezekiel knew they weren't really leaving. Men like that didn't give up easy, especially when their pride had been challenged. Inside the cabin, Mercy slumped against the wall as the sound of hoofbeats faded. Her whole body was shaking, from fear, from relief, from something else she couldn't name. Ezekiel had faced down 5 armed men for her, a stranger he'd known for less than a day. They're gone, Ezekiel said as he came back inside, but his voice was tight with worry. For now. Mercy emerged from the back room, her face pale but determined. They'll be back just like James said, and next time they won't come alone. Let me worry about that. How can you be so calm? Those men could kill you. Ezekiel set his rifle against the wall and looked at her. Really looked. In the morning light, he could see the full extent of her injuries, but he could also see the strength it had taken to survive them. This wasn't a helpless victim. This was a fighter who'd been knocked down but not broken. I've been dying slow out here for 7 years, he said quietly. Maybe it's time I tried living instead. The words hit Mercy like a physical blow. She'd spent so long running, so long thinking only about survival, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone willing to stand beside her instead of in her way. You don't understand what you're getting into, she said. Then explain it to me. So she did. She told him about the wagon train, about how James had cornered her one night when she was washing dishes by the creek. How he'd said she owed him for the passage, owed him for protection, owed him things no woman should ever have to pay. She told him about fighting back, about the beating that followed, about being left behind like garbage nobody wanted. They said I was lucky they didn't kill me, she finished. Said if I ever showed my face again, they'd finish what they started. Ezekiel listened without interrupting. His hands clenched into fists by the time she was done. He'd known men like James, had been hurt by men like James when he was too young to fight back. The difference was, now he was old enough and strong enough to do something about it. They're not going to touch you again, he said. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because I won't let them. The certainty in his voice made something warm unfurl in Mercy's chest. For the first time since the attack, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope, and it scared her more than all of James's threats combined. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Inside, 2 people who'd been alone too long stood looking at each other across a kitchen that suddenly felt like the center of the world. Neither of them knew that 5 miles away, James was already planning his return. And this time he was bringing more than threats. The storm hit at sunset, turning the world into a wall of wind and ice. Mercy watched from the kitchen window as lightning split the sky above the Nebraska prairie. Each flash lit up the yard like daylight, showing her the empty spaces where dangerous men might be hiding. The thunder that followed shook the cabin walls and made her jump every time. They won't come in this weather, Ezekiel said from behind her, but his voice carried doubt. You don't know James like I do. Weather won't stop him if he's angry enough. She was right, and they both knew it. Men driven by wounded pride didn't wait for perfect conditions. They acted when the rage got too hot to hold inside. Ezekiel moved around the cabin, checking the windows, testing the door bolts, making sure his extra ammunition was where he could reach it fast. The routine calmed him, gave his hands something to do while his mind worked on the problem they faced. "Tell me about your family," Mercy said suddenly. The request surprised him. "Why?" "Because if we're going to die together, I'd like to know something about the man I'm dying with." "We're not going to die." "Maybe not. But tell me anyway." Ezekiel settled into the chair across from her, keeping his rifle within arm's reach. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling the shutters and finding every crack in the walls. "My pa was a good man," he began. "Worked hard, never raised his hand to me or my mother. But he wasn't strong, if you know what I mean. When the bigger farmers wanted our land, he didn't fight back. Just bent his neck and hoped they'd leave us alone." "Did they?" "For a while. But men like that, they see weakness and they push harder. By the time I was old enough to help, Pa was already broken inside. The fever just finished what they'd started." Mercy heard the pain in his voice, the old anger that still burned after all these years. "Is that why you won't back down from James?" "Partly. I swore I'd never let anyone push me around the way they pushed my pa. But mostly." He paused, struggling with words for feelings he'd never spoken out loud. "Mostly it's because you deserve better than what they did to you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you fought back when a lot of people would have just taken it. I know you're sitting here worrying about my safety when you're the one in danger. I know you'd rather face those men alone than see me get hurt." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the earth itself. In the sudden silence that followed, they heard something that made their blood run cold. Horses, moving slow and careful through the storm. Ezekiel was at the window in 2 steps, peering through a crack in the shutters. Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of light he saw them. 7 riders this time, not 5. James had brought reinforcements. "Back room," he whispered to Mercy. "Now." "No." Her voice was steady, determined. "I'm tired of hiding. Mercy, they came here because of me. If there's going to be a fight, I should be part of it." Before Ezekiel could argue, a voice called out from the yard. Not James this time, someone older with the kind of authority that came from years of getting his way. "Morrison, we know she's in there. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful." "That's his father," Mercy whispered. "The wagon master. He's worse than James, if that's possible." Ezekiel moved to the door but didn't open it. "You boys need to ride on. This is private property. Property you're using to harbor a thief." The voice shot back. "Girl stole money and supplies from our train. We got every right to take her back." "Funny how your story keeps changing," Ezekiel called out. "This morning she owed you money. Now she's a thief. What'll it be tomorrow?" Silence from the yard, broken only by the wind and rain. Then James's voice, younger and meaner than his father's. "Tomorrow you'll be dead if you don't stop protecting her." The threat hung in the storm-torn air like a challenge no man could ignore. Ezekiel felt something hot and dangerous rise in his chest. The same feeling he'd had as a boy when bigger kids cornered him. The same rage that had kept him alive when the fever tried to take him. "Come and try it," he shouted back. From her position by the window, Mercy could see the men spreading out around the cabin. They weren't planning to wait for morning. They were getting ready to attack. 7 armed men against 1 farmer and an injured girl. The odds couldn't be worse. "Ezekiel," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Can it wait? We got company coming." "It can't wait." She turned from the window, and he saw something in her face that made him stop checking his rifle. "I lied to you about something." "What?" "I'm not just running from those men because they hurt me. I'm running because I killed one of them." The words hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. "What?" 3 nights ago, when James attacked me by the creek. He had a friend with him, a man named Crawford. When I fought back, Crawford tried to hold me down while James... She couldn't finish the sentence. I got hold of Crawford's knife. I didn't mean to kill him, but when he wouldn't let go... Jesus, Mercy. So you see, They're not just chasing me for fighting back. They're chasing me for murder. And if they take me alive, they'll hang me for it. Ezekiel stared at her, trying to process this new information. Killer. He was hiding a killer in his cabin. But when he looked at her face, saw the shame and fear and desperate courage, he knew it didn't change anything. Was it self-defense? He asked. Yes, but who's going to believe me against 7 witnesses saying otherwise? I believe you. The simple words broke something open in Mercy's chest. After days of carrying the weight of Crawford's death alone, someone finally believed her story. Someone finally saw her as more than just a murderer on the run. Outside, the storm was getting worse, but so was the tension in the yard. The men were moving closer, using the lightning flashes to navigate. Soon they'd be close enough to rush the cabin, and then talking would be over. How many bullets you got? Mercy asked. Enough. Ezekiel checked his rifle one more time. But Mercy, if things go bad. I know. Save the last bullet for me. He stared at her, horrified. I won't do that. You might have to, because I'm not going back to them alive. I won't let them hang me for defending myself. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and in its light they saw the men had reached the porch. No more time for talking, no more time for plans. The siege of Ezekiel Morrison's cabin was about to begin. And in the back of her mind, Mercy found herself thinking about something James had said earlier, about her being poison, about everything she touched turning bad. Maybe he was right. Maybe she really was bringing death and trouble to this good man who tried to help her. But it was too late to run now. Too late for anything except fighting and hoping they'd both live to see another dawn. The first shot shattered the kitchen window. Glass exploded inward as Ezekiel dove, pulling Mercy down with him behind the heavy wooden table. The bullet buried itself in the far wall with a solid thunk that seemed to echo louder than the thunder outside. So much for talking, Ezekiel shouted over the wind. Another shot, then another. The men outside were firing blind, trying to force them to show themselves. But the thick log walls of the cabin held strong, built to withstand prairie storms and whatever else the frontier could throw at them. Morrison, the wagon master's voice carried over the gunfire. Last chance. Send out the girl and we'll make it quick. Ezekiel raised his rifle and put a bullet through the broken window. Someone cursed in the yard, and he knew he'd come close to hitting his mark. How's that for an answer? He called back. From the safety of the overturned table, Mercy watched Ezekiel reload with practiced hands. His face was calm, focused like he'd done this before. Maybe he had. The frontier made fighters out of everyone, eventually. I count 7 shots so far, she said. They're testing us, seeing how we react. Smart girl. What else do you see? Mercy closed her eyes, listening to the sounds outside. Voices calling to each other. Horses moving around the cabin. Boots on wet wood. They're surrounding us. 3 on the front porch, 2 by the barn. Maybe 2 more at the back door. Good ears. That matches what I'm thinking. Thunder crashed overhead, and in the brief silence that followed, they heard something that made them both tense. Footsteps on the roof. Someone's up there, Mercy whispered. Ezekiel looked up at the ceiling, tracking the sound of boots moving across the wooden shingles. In a storm like this, climbing onto a roof was dangerous work. These men were serious about getting inside. They'll try the chimney, he said, or maybe punch a hole through the roof itself. What do we do? Before Ezekiel could answer, a chunk of burning wood fell down the chimney and landed in the fireplace. Then another. Someone was trying to smoke them out, force them into the open where the rifles were waiting. Back room, Ezekiel said. Now. They crawled across the floor, staying low as more shots rang out. The back room was smaller, with only one small window, but it was farther from the chimney and the smoke that was starting to fill the main cabin. This can't last, Mercy said, coughing as the air grew thick. They'll burn us out or break down the door. Either way, we're trapped. Ezekiel checked the small window, looking out at the storm-lashed yard. The back of the cabin faced open prairie, no cover for hundreds of yards. If they tried to run, they'd be easy targets. Maybe not, he said slowly. There might be another way. What do you mean? Root cellar. Dug it last spring in case of tornadoes. Entrance is under the kitchen floor, hidden beneath that loose board by the stove. Mercy felt a spark of hope. A root cellar would have a separate entrance, probably well hidden. They could wait out the siege underground, or maybe even escape while the men were focused on the burning cabin. Can we reach it without them seeing? If we're fast and quiet, maybe. But Mercy. He turned to look at her, his face serious in the flickering light from the main room. If we go down there, we might not come back up. Those men find that entrance. We'll be buried alive. Better than being shot or hanged. Another chunk of burning wood fell down the chimney, and this time it didn't land in the fireplace. It rolled onto the wooden floor, and within seconds, small flames began to spread. Decision time, Ezekiel said. They crawled back toward the kitchen, staying below the level of the windows. The smoke was getting thicker, making their eyes water and their lungs burn. Outside, the men were shouting orders, getting ready for their quarry to bolt from the burning building. Ezekiel found the loose board and pried it up with his knife. Beneath was a square hole just big enough for a person to squeeze through. A wooden ladder led down into darkness that seemed to swallow the light from above. Ladies first, he said. Mercy didn't argue. She swung her legs over the edge and started down the ladder, her heart pounding with each rung. The cellar was small and cramped, smelling of earth and potatoes and the musty dampness of underground spaces. Ezekiel followed, pulling the board back into place above them just as the kitchen window exploded in another shower of glass and gunfire. In the darkness below, they could hear the men above getting bolder, moving closer to the cabin as the fire spread. There, Ezekiel whispered, pointing to a faint rectangle of gray light at the far end of the cellar. Exits about 50 yards from the cabin, hidden in that grove of cottonwoods by the creek. How long can we stay down here? Long enough, I hope. Question is, what do we do after? Those men aren't going to give up and ride away just because they think we're dead. Above them, boots stomped across the floor. Someone was inside the cabin now, searching through the smoke and flames. They heard furniture being overturned, doors slamming, angry voices as the men realized their prey had vanished. Where the hell are they? James's voice, high with frustration. Check everywhere, his father ordered. They didn't just disappear. Mercy and Ezekiel pressed themselves against the earthen walls of the cellar, hardly daring to breathe. If someone noticed the loose board, if they thought to look down, but the searchers were focused on the obvious places, under beds, behind doors, in closets. The idea of a hidden cellar didn't seem to occur to them. Building's going to collapse soon, one of the men said. Fire's spreading too fast. Let it burn, the wagon master replied. If they're still inside, the smoke will finish them. If they got out, we'll find their tracks in the morning. What about the bodies? Won't people ask questions if we can't produce them? Bodies burn up in fires all the time on the frontier. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't mind their own business. The casual way he talked about their deaths made Mercy's skin crawl. These weren't just angry men seeking justice. They were killers who'd planned this whole thing out. Even if she surrendered, even if she tried to explain about Crawford's death, they'd never let her live to tell her side of the story. The voices moved away from the kitchen, but the smoke was seeping down through the cracks in the floorboards above. Soon the air in the cellar would be unbreathable. We have to move, Ezekiel whispered. They crawled toward the far end of the cellar, feeling their way in the darkness. The exit was a slanted door that opened upward into the storm. Ezekiel pushed it open a crack and peered out. The cottonwood grove was maybe 30 feet away, barely visible through the wind and rain. Between them and the trees was open ground where they'd be exposed if anyone was watching. But the alternative was suffocating in the smoke-filled cellar or burning alive in the cabin above. Ready? He asked. Mercy nodded, then realized he couldn't see her in the darkness. Ready. They slipped out into the storm, the cold rain hitting them like a physical blow after the heat and smoke below. Lightning flashed as they ran for the trees, and for one terrifying moment, Mercy was sure someone would see them. But the men were all focused on the burning cabin, watching it collapse in on itself with satisfied grunts. Safe in the grove, they caught their breath and watched their enemies celebrate what they thought was victory. The cabin that had been Ezekiel's home for 7 years was gone, reduced to ash and glowing embers that hissed in the rain. "I'm sorry," Mercy whispered. "I'm so sorry you lost everything because of me." "It's just wood and nails," Ezekiel replied, but she could hear the pain in his voice. "Can be rebuilt." "What now?" Before he could answer, they heard horses moving away from the ruins. The men were leaving, satisfied that their job was done. But Mercy knew they'd be back in the morning to look for bodies, to make sure their story would hold up. "Now we disappear," Ezekiel said. "At least until we can figure out how to clear your name." In the distance, lightning illuminated 7 riders heading toward town. Soon they'd be telling everyone who'd listen about the tragic fire that killed a farmer and the murderer he'd been hiding. But in the Cottonwood Grove, 2 people who were supposed to be dead began planning their next move in a war that was far from over. Dawn brought a terrible beauty to the burned remains of Ezekiel's farm. Where the cabin had stood, only blackened timber and twisted metal remained. Smoke still rose from the ashes, gray ribbons that twisted in the morning breeze like the ghosts of all the memories that had died in the flames. Mercy stood at the edge of the Cottonwood Grove, staring at the destruction her presence had caused. "Stop it," Ezekiel said quietly. "Stop what?" "Blaming yourself. I can see it in your face." She turned to look at him. This man who'd lost everything because he'd chosen to help a stranger. His clothes were torn and dirty from their night hiding in the woods. His face was streaked with soot and exhaustion. But his eyes held no anger toward her, no regret for the choice he'd made. "How can you not hate me?" she asked. "Because hating you won't bring my cabin back. And because what happened here wasn't your fault. If you hadn't come here, those men would still be the kind of people who hurt innocent women. The problem isn't you, Mercy. The problem is them." In the distance, they could see riders approaching the farm. 3 men this time, not 7. Mercy felt her heart jump until she realized these weren't James and his father. These riders wore badges that caught the morning sun. "Lawmen," Ezekiel said. "Do we run?" "No. Running makes us look guilty. Besides, I know the sheriff. Good man named Patterson. Fair as they come." They watched the 3 riders stop at the burned cabin and dismount. Even from a distance, they could see the men examining the ruins, looking for signs of what had happened. One of them, tall, gray-haired, with the careful movements of someone used to reading trouble, began walking in circles around the site. "That's Patterson," Ezekiel said. "He's tracking. What if James and his father got to him first? What if they told him we're criminals? Then we tell him the truth. All of it." Mercy felt panic rise in her throat. "Ezekiel, I killed a man. Even if it was self-defense. Even if I had no choice. Then we make sure he understands what really happened." Before Mercy could argue, the sheriff looked up and saw them standing in the tree line. He said something to his deputies, then started walking toward them with his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. "Morrison," he called out. "That you over there?" "It's me, Sheriff." Ezekiel stepped out of the trees, keeping his hands visible. "Got a story to tell you." "I'll bet you do." Patterson's voice carried relief and curiosity in equal measure. "James Cartwright came to town this morning with quite a tale. Said you and some girl died in a fire last night. As you can see, reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated." Sheriff Patterson was close enough now for them to see his face clearly. He was older than Mercy had expected, maybe 50, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of decades dealing with frontier justice. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I'm Sheriff Patterson, and you would be the young lady who's caused all this excitement." "My name is Mercy Wells," she said, stepping forward with her chin raised. "And yes, I suppose I am. James Cartwright says you murdered a man named Crawford 3 nights ago. Says you stole money and supplies from their wagon train. Says Morrison here was harboring a fugitive." Patterson's voice was calm, professional. What do you say to that? Mercy felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided. She could lie, try to run, or she could trust this stranger with her life and tell him the truth. I did kill Crawford, she said simply. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't reach for his gun. That's honest of you. Want to tell me why? Because he was holding me down while James Cartwright tried to rape me. The words hung in the morning air like a physical thing. Patterson's face went very still, and Mercy saw something cold and dangerous flicker in his eyes. That's a serious accusation, miss. It's the truth. She fought them off, Ezekiel added. Came to my farm hurt and scared. These men burned my cabin trying to get to her. Patterson looked from Mercy to Ezekiel to the smoking ruins behind them. James told me you folks died in an accidental fire. Didn't mention anything about him being here when it happened. James Cartwright is a liar, Mercy said. And worse than a liar. Well, now that's interesting, because I've had my suspicions about young Cartwright for some time. Had reports of trouble on other wagon trains he's been part of. Women going missing, unexplained accidents, that sort of thing. Hope fluttered in Mercy's chest like a bird trying to escape a cage. You believe me? I believe you're telling me what you think happened. Question is, can you prove it? Crawford's body should still be by the creek where their wagon train camped, Ezekiel said. If the animals haven't gotten to it. Already found it, Patterson said grimly. Single knife wound to the chest. Looks like close quarters fighting. The kind that happens when someone's defending themselves. Mercy's knees nearly buckled with relief. Physical evidence. Something that could back up her story. There's more, the sheriff continued. Found a torn piece of dress fabric in Crawford's hand. Blue cotton. Looks like it matches what you're wearing. Also found this. He pulled something from his pocket. A small silver locket that Mercy recognized with a gasp. That's mine. Crawford tore it off my neck when he grabbed me. Patterson examined the locket carefully. Got initials on it. M.W. That stand for Mercy Wells. Yes, my mother gave it to me before she died. James mention anything about finding this at the scene? No, Mercy said. He wouldn't have. It proves I was there, proves I fought back. The sheriff nodded slowly. Physical evidence tells a different story than the one James Cartwright's been spreading around town. Question is, what do we do about it? Arrest him, Mercy said simply. On what charge? He'll say you seduced Crawford, that the killing was premeditated. His word against yours, and he's got 6 witnesses who'll swear to whatever story he tells them. Mercy felt her hope crumble. Even with the evidence, even with a sheriff who seemed to believe her, James had the advantage of numbers and social standing. However, Patterson continued, there might be another way. What do you mean? Ezekiel asked. Frontier justice works different than city justice. Out here, a man's reputation matters more than his family name. And James Cartwright's reputation is about to take a serious hit. I don't understand. Patterson smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Word's going to get around about what really happened here. About a young lady defending her honor and a good man standing up for what's right. About some would-be rapists who burned down an innocent farmer's home to cover their crimes. Will that be enough? Mercy asked. Depends on James. If he's smart, he'll take his wagon train and disappear into the territories. If he's stupid, he'll try to stick around and brazen it out. And if he's stupid, then we'll be ready for him. In the distance, Mercy could see more riders approaching. But these weren't armed men. They were neighbors, farmers and their wives, drawn by the smoke and the stories that were already spreading through the territory like wildfire. Looks like word's getting out already, Patterson observed. James might find the climate around here a bit chillier than he's used to. As the riders drew closer, Mercy realized something had changed. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. For the first time since Crawford's death, she was standing her ground and telling her story to people who might actually listen. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that felt like justice. And beside her, Ezekiel stood ready to face whatever came next, his loyalty unwavering despite everything it had cost him. The war for Mercy's freedom was far from over, but for the first time, she wasn't fighting it alone. "Marry me." The words slipped out of Ezekiel's mouth so suddenly that even he looked surprised he'd said them. They were standing in the Hendersons' barn, where the neighboring family had given them shelter after the fire. Mercy was brushing down one of the horses, her hands steady despite everything that had happened. She froze, the brush halfway down the mare's flank. "What did you say?" "I said marry me." This time Ezekiel said it with purpose, like he'd been thinking about it for hours instead of blurting it out without warning. "Right now. Today." Mercy turned to face him, her blue eyes wide with shock. "Ezekiel, have you lost your mind? We barely know each other. Yesterday your house burned down. Today the sheriff is investigating a murder. This is hardly the time for." "This is exactly the time." He stepped closer, his voice urgent but gentle. "Think about it, Mercy. James and his father, they can't touch a married woman the same way they can touch someone traveling alone. Marriage gives you protection under the law." "Protection?" She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "From what? They still think I'm a murderer. But now you're a murderer with a husband who'll stand by you. That changes things in the eyes of the law and the community." Outside the barn, they could hear Mrs. Henderson calling her children in for the midday meal. Normal family sounds from a normal family living a normal life. It seemed impossible that such peace could exist in the same world where men burned down houses and women killed to defend themselves. "You don't love me," Mercy said quietly. "No," Ezekiel admitted. "But I respect you, and I like you, and I think, given time, love might grow between us. And if it doesn't, then we'll be two people helping each other survive in a hard world. I've seen worse marriages built on less." Mercy resumed brushing the horse, using the familiar motion to help her think. Marriage. The word felt strange in her mind, like a foreign language she'd never learned to speak. She'd dreamed of marriage once, back when she was young enough to believe in fairy tales. But those dreams had died with her parents, buried under years of just trying to stay alive. "What's really behind this?" she asked. "The truth." Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight that streamed through the barn doors. "Sheriff Patterson pulled me aside this morning while you were washing up. James and his father aren't planning to leave quietly. They're telling everyone in town that you seduced Crawford, that you planned to rob the wagon train all along. And people believe them? Some do. James comes from money, has connections. His word carries weight with certain folks." Mercy's hand tightened on the brush until her knuckles went white. "So even with the evidence, even with the sheriff believing me, it might not be enough." "It might not be. But a married woman with a respectable husband telling the same story? That carries different weight entirely." "Respectable?" Mercy almost smiled. "You're a dirt farmer whose house just burned down harboring a fugitive. I'm a dirt farmer who stands up for what's right. In these parts, that counts for something." The horse nickered softly, sensing the tension in the air. Mercy stroked its neck, thinking about choices and consequences and the kind of life she'd be choosing if she said yes. "There's something else," Ezekiel said. "Something Patterson didn't want to say in front of you." "What?" "James has been asking questions around town. About you, about me, about who might be willing to help us. He's not just trying to clear his name. He's planning something." Fear crawled up Mercy's spine like ice water. "What kind of something?" "The kind that ends with you dead and him riding away clean. So this marriage proposal, it's not really about marriage at all. It's about keeping me alive. It's about both." Ezekiel moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body but not so close that she felt trapped. "I won't lie to you, Mercy. The protection matters. But that's not the only reason." "Then what's the other reason?" "Because yesterday, for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel alone. And when I saw you standing up to James, when I watched you refuse to let fear break you," he paused, searching for words, "I saw someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with." The honesty in his voice made something warm uncurl in Mercy's chest. This wasn't a declaration of undying love, but it was something else. Something real and solid and true. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "what happens then?" "Then we go to Reverend Miller and make it legal. Right now, today, before James can cause any more trouble. And after that? After that, we figure out how to be married. How to build something good out of all this mess." Mercy set down the brush and turned to face him fully. In the golden light of the barn, Ezekiel looked younger than his 34 years. There was hope in his eyes and determination, and something else she was afraid to name. "You know I might never love you the way a wife should love a husband," she said. "You know I might never be the husband you dreamed of when you were a girl. I stopped dreaming a long time ago. Maybe it's time to start again." Outside, they heard horses approaching, several of them moving fast. Ezekiel tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he'd propped against the barn wall. "More visitors," Mercy said, but she didn't sound afraid anymore. Something had changed in the last few minutes, some decision made without words. "Mercy," Ezekiel said urgently, "I need an answer. If that's James coming back with more men." "Yes, yes, yes, I'll marry you. Right now, today, before anything else can go wrong." Relief flooded Ezekiel's face like sunrise. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. We'll figure out the rest as we go." The horses were in the yard now, and they could hear voices. Men's voices, urgent and excited. But for just a moment longer, in the quiet safety of the barn, two people who'd found each other in the darkness made a promise that would change everything. "Mrs. Morrison," Ezekiel said, testing how the name sounded. "Mr. Morrison," Mercy replied, and this time when she almost smiled, she let herself finish it. Outside, someone was calling their names. Time to face whatever new crisis was heading their way. But this time they'd face it together, as husband and wife. The preacher's dead. Sheriff Patterson stood in the Hendersons' kitchen, his hat in his hands and his face grim as winter. The words hit the room like a physical blow, stopping all conversation and making Mrs. Henderson gasp in horror. "What happened?" Ezekiel asked, though from the sheriff's expression, he already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. "Found Reverend Miller this morning in his church. Someone beat him bad, then strung him up to make it look like he hanged himself. But the bruises tell a different story." Mercy felt the blood drain from her face. "James? Can't prove it. But Miller's the only preacher within 50 miles. And word got around fast that you two were planning to get married today. So they killed him to stop the wedding?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was sharp with outrage. That's murder. "That's what it is," Patterson agreed. "Question is, what do we do about it?" Ezekiel stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the yard where his burned cabin was still visible in the distance. "How many men does James have with him now?" "Started with 7. But word's been spreading about what really happened to your place. Some of the wagon train folks are having second thoughts about following a man who burns down farmhouses and kills preachers." "How many second thoughts?" Mercy asked. "Enough that James is down to maybe 4 men willing to keep riding with him. His father, 2 of the original crew, and some drifter they picked up in town." "Still 4 against 2, Ezekiel said. "Actually, it's 4 against more than 2. Patterson's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Folks around here don't take kindly to murdering men of God. You've got some backing now." "What kind of backing?" "The kind that comes with rifles and the willingness to use them." Mrs. Henderson set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "You mean the neighbors are taking sides?" "They already have. Henderson, the Johnsons, old Pete Kozlov, even some of the town merchants. They're all saying the same thing. James Cartwright has gone too far." Hope fluttered in Mercy's chest, but she pushed it down. She'd learned not to trust hope too easily. "What does that mean for us?" "Means you're not facing this alone anymore. But it also means James is getting desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." As if summoned by the sheriff's words, the sound of approaching horses filled the air outside. But this time, the riders who appeared in the yard weren't enemies. Mercy recognized Mr. Henderson returning from town, along with 3 other men she'd met earlier that morning. "John's back," Mrs. Henderson said, relief clear in her voice. Her husband dismounted and strode toward the house, his face tight with anger and purpose. Behind him, the other men checked their weapons and took positions around the yard like they expected trouble. "Sheriff," Henderson said as he entered the kitchen, "got some news from town. Good news or bad news?" "Bit of both. James and his boys rode out about an hour ago, heading west. But they didn't go far. They're camped by Miller's Creek, about 5 miles from here." "Why would they stay so close?" Mercy asked. "Because they're not done yet," Ezekiel said grimly. "They're waiting for something." Patterson nodded. "My thinking exactly. Question is, what are they waiting for?" Henderson pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "That's the bad news. James sent word to the territorial marshal in Nebraska City. Claims he's got witnesses to a murder and needs federal help bringing in a dangerous fugitive." The kitchen went dead silent. Federal marshals meant serious law enforcement, the kind that asked questions later and shot first. If James had convinced them that Mercy was a dangerous criminal, "How long before the marshal gets here?" Ezekiel asked. 3 days, maybe 4. Depends on whether he believes James's story enough to come running. And if he does believe it, then we've got federal law coming down on our side of this fight, and that changes everything. Mercy stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "I won't let innocent people get hurt because of me. Maybe I should just—" "Don't even think it," Ezekiel interrupted. "Running won't solve this. It'll just prove to the marshal that James was right about you. So what do? "We end this," Patterson said simply. "Before the marshal arrives. Before James can spread any more lies. Before anyone else gets killed." "How?" "By giving James exactly what he wants." Every person in the room stared at the sheriff like he'd lost his mind. Mrs. Henderson was the first to find her voice. "You want to hand Mercy over to those murderers?" "No. I want to make James think he's getting what he wants." "There's a difference." Understanding dawned on Ezekiel's face. "A trap." "Exactly. James wants Mercy? Fine. We'll arrange a meeting. Nice and public with plenty of witnesses. Let him try to take her with half the county watching." "That's dangerous," Henderson said. "What if something goes wrong?" "Something's already gone wrong," Patterson replied. "A good man is dead, and more people will die if we don't stop this here and now." Mercy walked back to the window, looking out at the peaceful farmyard where children played and chickens pecked in the dirt. Normal life, the kind she'd almost forgotten existed. The kind she might never have if this didn't end. "What would you need me to do?" she asked quietly. "Simple. Show up at the arranged place and time. Act scared like you're trying to run. Give James the chance to be a hero in front of witnesses. And when he tries to take me?" Patterson smiled, and it was a cold expression that reminded everyone he'd been dealing with frontier justice for 20 years. "That's when he finds out how many friends you've made around here." "It's risky," Ezekiel said. "Everything's risky now. But this way, we control the situation instead of reacting to it." Mercy turned from the window, her decision made. "When and where?" "Tomorrow morning. Church grounds where Miller was killed. Seems fitting." "And you're sure this will work?" "I'm sure of 2 things," Patterson said. "First, James Cartwright isn't as smart as he thinks he is. Second, he's about to find out what happens when you mess with people who know how to fight back." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Tomorrow would bring either justice or tragedy, and there was no way to know which until the moment arrived. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Mercy felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. She felt ready to fight back and win. The church bell was missing its rope. Mercy stood in the doorway of the small wooden church where Reverend Miller had died, staring up at the bell tower where a length of hemp still swayed in the morning breeze. The sight made her stomach turn, knowing what that rope had been used for, but she forced herself to stay calm. Today's plan depended on her looking like easy prey. "You sure about this?" Ezekiel whispered from beside her. He was dressed like a man going to his own funeral. Clean shirt, dark jacket, his hair slicked back with water. The effect was spoiled by the pistol hidden under his coat. "Too late to change my mind now," Mercy replied, though her voice shook slightly. Around the church grounds, she could see the other players in Sheriff Patterson's elaborate trap. Henderson crouched behind a cluster of tombstones to her left. Old Pete Kozlov had positioned himself in the church's back room with a clear view through the windows. Two more neighbors were hidden in the trees that bordered the cemetery. The plan was simple. Make it look like Mercy was trying to escape on her own, give James the chance to take her, then spring the trap when he made his move. Simple, but with plenty of ways it could go wrong. "There," Ezekiel said quietly. For riders were approaching from the west, moving at an easy pace like men with all the time in the world. Even from a distance, Mercy could make out James in the lead, sitting his horse like he owned the entire territory. His father rode beside him, along with two other men she didn't recognize. "Where's the fifth man?" she asked. Patterson said James was down to 4. Maybe the count was wrong. Or maybe the fifth man was somewhere else, waiting for them to make a mistake. The thought sent ice through Mercy's veins, but she pushed the fear down. This had to work. There were no other options left. "Time to go," Ezekiel said. They walked out of the church together, making no effort to hide themselves. According to the plan, Mercy was supposed to be saying goodbye to her husband before attempting to flee on horseback. James needed to see them together, needed to think he was breaking up a touching farewell. "I love you," Ezekiel said, loud enough for the approaching riders to hear. "I love you too," Mercy replied, and was surprised to find the words didn't feel entirely like a lie. They'd been married for less than 24 hours, wed in a hurried ceremony in the Hendersons' parlor with Mrs. Henderson's wedding ring serving as a temporary band. It wasn't the wedding either of them had dreamed of, but it was real, legal, binding, and maybe, in time, it could become something more. The riders were close enough now for Mercy to see James's face clearly. He looked older than she remembered, harder around the eyes, like the events of the past few days had burned away whatever youth he'd once possessed. His father rode with the rigid posture of a military man, every line of his body radiating controlled violence. "Mrs. Morrison," James called out, his voice carrying across the cemetery with mock politeness. "How lovely to see you again." Mercy felt Ezekiel tense beside her, but she placed a warning hand on his arm. "Not yet." They had to let James make the first move. "James," she replied steadily, "I heard you were leaving the territory. Change of plans. Seems we have some unfinished business to attend to." "What kind of business?" James dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible but ready. His companions remained on horseback, forming a loose semicircle that would make escape difficult. Everything about their positioning screamed military training. These weren't just angry cowboys anymore. The kind that involves a murderer facing justice. James's father spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "I defended myself," Mercy said. "You killed a good man in cold blood," the elder Cartwright replied. "And you've been spreading lies to cover your crime. The only lies being spread are yours." "Enough." James stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "We're taking you back to Nebraska City to face a federal marshal. You can come quiet, or we can make this difficult." From her position, Mercy could see Henderson shifting behind the tombstones, getting ready to move. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. James was being too polite, too controlled. Where was the anger that had driven him to burn down Ezekiel's cabin? "I'm not going anywhere with you," Mercy said. "I was hoping you'd say that." James smiled, and the expression was cold as winter morning. "Boys." Two things happened at once. The riders behind James drew their weapons, and a fifth man stepped out from behind the church. Not one of James's original crew, but someone wearing a federal marshal's badge. The trap had been turned around on them. "Everyone stay calm," the marshal said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "I'm Marshal Wade Thompson. and I have a warrant for the arrest of Mercy Wells on charges of murder and theft." Mercy felt the world tilt beneath her feet. A real federal marshal, not some local sheriff who might listen to her story. This was exactly what Patterson had been afraid of. "Marshal," Ezekiel said carefully, "there are things about this case you should know." "Save it, Farmer. I've heard James Cartwright's testimony. I've seen the evidence, and I've made my decision. The woman comes with me." "What evidence?" Mercy demanded. Marshal Thompson pulled a piece of paper from his coat. "Sworn statements from 6 witnesses that you seduced Robert Crawford, then murdered him when he refused to give you money. Physical evidence placing you at the scene. And testimony that you've been evading justice with the help of this man. Those witnesses are lying. That's for a judge to decide. Now, are you going to come peaceful, or do we need to use force?" Around the cemetery, Mercy could sense the hidden neighbors shifting position, unsure whether to spring their trap against a federal officer. Shooting a marshal was a federal crime that would bring the full weight of the government down on them. "She's innocent," Ezekiel said. "If that's true, a court will prove it. But right now, she's coming with me." James was still smiling, enjoying every moment of Mercy's defeat. But there was something else in his expression. Something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been more worried about this confrontation than he'd let on. "Marshal Thompson," a new voice said from behind the church, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Sheriff Patterson stepped into view, his own badge catching the morning sunlight. Behind him came 2 more men, one wearing a territorial judge's robes, the other carrying a leather satchel that marked him as some kind of official. "Sheriff Patterson," the marshal said with obvious annoyance, "this is federal business now." "Actually, it's not." The judge stepped forward, an elderly man with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that made everyone stop talking. "I'm Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court, and I have some questions about the evidence you've been shown." Marshal Thompson's confidence flickered for just a moment. "Your Honor, I was told this was a clear case." "Nothing involving James Cartwright is ever clear," the judge interrupted, "especially when it involves dead witnesses and burned evidence." "What do you mean, dead witnesses?" "I mean that 3 of the 6 men who gave you those sworn statements are now deceased. Died in various accidents over the past 2 days. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" The color drained from James's face. Around the cemetery, Mercy could see the hidden neighbors starting to move, sensing that the tide was turning. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "we have new evidence that significantly contradicts Mr. Cartwright's version of events." "What new evidence?" The 3rd man stepped forward, opening his leather satchel. "I'm Dr. Morrison from Nebraska City. I examined Robert Crawford's body yesterday, and I found several things that suggest this was a case of self-defense, not murder." Mercy felt hope surge in her chest, but she forced herself to stay still. This wasn't over yet. "Dr. Morrison," the judge said formally, "please share your findings with Marshal Thompson." And as the doctor began to speak, Mercy realized that the trap hadn't been sprung on them after all. It had been sprung on James Cartwright, and he was finally about to face the justice he'd been running from. The knife wounds tell the whole story. Dr. Morrison spread his examination papers on a flat tombstone like he was giving a lecture to medical students instead of standing in a cemetery where a man had been murdered. His voice was calm, professional, but every word he spoke felt like another nail in James Cartwright's coffin. Robert Crawford was stabbed once, in the chest, at an upward angle consistent with someone shorter defending themselves against a taller attacker. The blade went between the ribs, suggesting close quarters and panic rather than deliberate aim. Marshal Thompson studied the papers with growing unease. That could still be murder. It could be, except for the other injuries. Crawford had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, scratches on his face, and bruising around his wrists that suggests he was restraining someone against their will. "What does that prove?" James demanded, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "It proves," Judge Harrison said quietly, "that Miss Wells, excuse me, Mrs. Morrison, was telling the truth about defending herself." The words hung in the morning air like a pronouncement from on high. Around the cemetery, Mercy could see the hidden neighbors beginning to emerge from their hiding places, sensing that the danger had passed. "There's more," Dr. Morrison continued. "I found fabric under Crawford's fingernails that matches Mrs. Morrison's torn dress, and skin under her fingernails that matches Crawford's, both consistent with a violent struggle." "Couldn't that evidence be faked?" Marshall Thompson asked, but he was grasping at straws and everyone knew it. "Not the timing of the injuries. Crawford died approximately 4 days ago, which matches Mrs. Morrison's account. But here's the interesting part, he had alcohol in his blood. Quite a lot of it." James's father spoke for the first time since the judge had arrived. "What's your point, doctor?" "My point is that drunk men make poor decisions. And according to the other women on your wagon train, the ones still alive to testify, Crawford and your son had been drinking heavily that night and talking about teaching the pretty blonde girl some manners." "Those women are lying," James burst out. "Are they?" Judge Harrison pulled a folded paper from his robes. "Because I have sworn statements from 4 different women, all saying the same thing. That you and Crawford made unwelcome advances toward Mrs. Morrison, that she rejected you repeatedly, and that on the night in question, you followed her to the creek with violent intentions." Mercy felt her knees go weak with relief. After days of being hunted like a criminal, finally someone in authority was listening to the truth. "Your Honor," Marshall Thompson said slowly, "if this evidence is accurate, then the charges against Mrs. Morrison should be dropped immediately," the judge finished. "This is clearly a case of justified self-defense." "Now wait just a minute." James's father rode his horse closer to the group, his face red with anger. "My son's testimony." "Your son's testimony," Judge Harrison interrupted, "is contradicted by physical evidence, witness statements, and medical examination. Furthermore, I have reports of intimidation, property destruction, and the murder of Reverend Miller that suggest your son has been trying to cover up his crimes through violence. You can't prove James killed the preacher." "Actually, we can." Sheriff Patterson stepped forward with a grim smile. "Found this in the church bell tower yesterday." He held up a silver watch, expensive, engraved, the kind of thing a wealthy young man might wear to impress people. "Property of James Cartwright," Patterson read from the inscription. "Must have fallen out of his pocket while he was stringing up the Reverend." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if the whole world was holding its breath. James looked around desperately, seeing his carefully constructed lies crumbling around him. His father's face had gone pale, finally understanding that his son wasn't just guilty of attempted rape. He was guilty of murder. "This is all fabricated," James shouted. "You're all in on this together." "Son," his father said quietly, "stop talking." "No, I won't let them. I said stop talking." The elder Cartwright's voice carried the snap of military command. "Marshall Thompson, I believe you have enough evidence to make an arrest." "Actually," the marshal said, looking around at the armed neighbors who were now fully visible, "I think I have enough evidence to make several arrests." "What do you mean?" James asked. "I mean you're under arrest for the murder of Reverend Miller, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, intimidation of witnesses, and filing false federal charges." Thompson's voice was flat, professional. "Your father is under arrest as an accessory to these crimes." "You can't arrest my father. He didn't do anything. He helped plan the attack on the Morrison farm. He participated in the intimidation campaign, and he knowingly filed false federal charges to cover up his son's crimes." The marshal looked genuinely disgusted. "Did you really think you could fool a federal investigation with a few dead witnesses and some forged statements?" James made a desperate grab for his gun, but Ezekiel was faster. His fist caught James in the jaw with a satisfying crack that sent the younger man sprawling in the dirt among the tombstones. "That's for burning down my house," Ezekiel said calmly. "And this," Mercy said, stepping forward and slapping James hard across the face, "is for Crawford. For the Reverend. For every woman you've hurt and every lie you've told." James looked up at her from the ground, his face bloody and his eyes filled with rage. "This isn't over." Yes, Judge Harrison said firmly. It is. As Marshal Thompson and his deputies shackled James and his father, Mercy felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The sweet taste of justice served. Not perfect justice, maybe, but justice nonetheless. Mrs. Morrison, the judge said formally, on behalf of the territorial court, I apologize for the ordeal you've endured. All charges against you are hereby dropped. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank your husband and these neighbors who were willing to stand up for what's right. Mercy looked around at the people who had risked their lives to help her. Henderson, old Pete Kozlov, Sheriff Patterson, even Mrs. Henderson, who was now hurrying across the cemetery with tears of relief on her face. Thank you, she said simply. All of you. As the prisoners were loaded onto horses for the ride to Nebraska City, Ezekiel took Mercy's hand in his. The touch was gentle, comforting, full of promise for whatever came next. So what now, Mrs. Morrison? He asked. Mercy looked at the ruins of his cabin in the distance, then at the church where they stood, then at the man who had risked everything to protect her. Now we rebuild, she said. Everything, starting with us. Think we can make it work? A real marriage? I think, Mercy said slowly, that we've already proven we can survive anything together. Love might be easier. As they walked away from the cemetery hand in hand, the morning sun painted the Nebraska prairie in shades of gold and green. Behind them, the church bell finally rang. Someone had found a new rope, and the sound carried across the land like a promise of better days ahead. In the distance, two people who had learned to fight for what they wanted began the long, hopeful work of building a life together. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, the future looked bright enough to believe in.